morning and aloha. Thank you, Maui, for welcoming us at the council here. We're really very proud to be here as we work towards stabilization and recovery for Lahaina. This morning, my heart is just so full. Full for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, I'm so proud of Kuhio and the entire team at CNHA. I can't tell you, as a mentor, as a friend, as a colleague, what this means to be here, not as the CEO, and watching Kuhio and the next generation of young leaders really bring CNHA to a whole new level that I couldn't even imagine. Last night, Kuhio and I were talking, and he told me, "What the heck did you see in me when you decided that I should be your successor?" And so I share with you this morning that what I saw in Kuhio as a young man was an entrepreneur who had drive, a community organizer, and just a young person who got stuff done. Little bit ku'e, too, that would push the buttons every now and then, but that's really what I saw in CNHA. In the early days, CNHA had so many aspirations. I remember Robin and I talking about, wouldn't it be awesome to see flags hanging along Kalakaua saying, "Welcome, Hawaiians." And she would refer to that as the Take Back Waikiki campaign. And here Kuhio is with Kilohana by CNHA, helping to put Native perspective into tourism. And last year we did just that, featuring all of the Native Hawaiian Aola leaders down through Kalakaua. We imagined that there could be a Native Hawaiian convention on the continent, and earlier this year, the council made that possible. We extended our reach to Las Vegas with over 1,000 people there. And also thought about bringing the conference to the neighbor islands. And so I'm proud to be with you here in Maui and Kuhio. I will tell you that Moku o Keawe and Kauai have already been dropping bugs in our ears about the need for this convention to go across the Pai'aina. I think that what inspires me most and why I feel so much love and gratitude here today is really when I think about the next generation of leaders. And what I mean by that, because people say, what do you mean by the next generation of leaders? I'm talking about leaders who are 15, 20 years younger than me. They're in their mid-30s and really movers and shakers doing things for our lahui. I think they have a slightly different view of the world. They grew up more grounded in culture, understanding the connection between people and place, and we didn't always have that in place when we were growing up. And so their view of the world, their perspective sometimes differs. And so I'm really proud of all of the next generation leaders that are at CNHA working with and alongside Kuhio and in other areas of our community making a true difference. A week or so ago, I had the privilege of just being an observer at a convening that was happening between freshmen at Kamehameha schools with the UN ambassador. And I was just sitting there amazed by these young folks, ninth graders at KS Kapalama, speaking with the ambassador, and were receiving recognition as the first youth council on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And as I listened to their conversation, I was truly in awe. And I walked away from that conversation with really two big takeaways. And the first was they recommended to the ambassador that we believe there should be an 18th SDG. And she said, "Really? What would that 18th SDG be?" And they said, "Cultural vibrancy." Because the program that we were in started us off in the lo'i, allowing us to connect to our aina, to our roots, to understand who we are as Kanaka. And from that, we built our skills in leadership, it built our confidence. And so we went from the lo'i to the UN. And we believe that every student, regardless of ethnicity, whether you are Hawaiian, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, that grounding yourself, cultural vibrancy helps us achieve those sustainable development goals, and it should be the 18th. I thought to myself, wow, these are 9th graders. The second one was that hope is an action word. Think about that. That hope is an action word. It is not a feeling, it's not an aspiration. That hope requires us to take action. And so as we're here in Maui, as we think about what's happening in Lahaina and the long road that lies ahead, I challenge each of us to provide hope and to embrace the fact that hope is an action word. And with that, where am I going with all of this? I'm going to turn the rest of my time over as a firm believer that the best solutions to the challenges that our community face, they are born, they live, and they reside in the community themselves. So I came across a young man who I'd like to introduce to you, who's been sitting in his home. He was raised here on Maui in Pukalani, and he is sharing the expertise that he has. He's a data guy. He's crunching data that he can find from anywhere and anyone. He's been looking for a platform to talk about what he has learned and what he has seen and how the data that he's crunching might help. And he came across Kuhio and I, and so what does Kuhio do? He hires him. And so I want to turn my time over to a real solution builder, a young next-gen leader who is up and coming, who is now working alongside Kuhio at the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, who is helping us think about data to make really informed decisions about how we meet the housing need, which is the ultimate challenge for us moving forward with a solution for Lahaina. So please join me in welcoming Matt Jachowski to the stage, and I hope that you will be in as much awe as I was in what this young man has been working on. Mahalo.
Thank you. Mahalo, Michelle, for that introduction. Like she said, I'm raised on Maui. I'm a proud Maui high school graduate, and I live back here now with my young family. As soon as the fires happened, just like everybody else on the island, I knew I had a kuleana to help. And my particular skills are software development and data analysis. So what I did is I immediately created a website called mauihalematch.org, where I tried to create a platform for our displaced families to be able to connect to our landlords and our homeowners. And I was immediately amazed at the mismatch between the supply and demand. We have so many families who are looking for housing and so few landlords who are able to offer them housing. At this point, I'm up to nearly 900 families requesting housing on the site and just shy of 100 landlords who've stepped forward to house them. That led me down this big rabbit hole. It's not good enough to put this platform out there and not see people connected to housing. So I started looking at the data that people were telling me on their housing needs, data from Airbnb about our short-term rentals, and public county data about what kind of housing supply we have available on Maui. I'm not going to go through all this data right here, but this is just an example of some of the charts and things I was able to create from this data. And I started to construct a story and a solution for how we can get out of this housing crisis. I was working with Maui Rapid Response on this project, and they were trying to give me a platform, but I had to fight hard to get time with our government leaders, with leaders of these other charitable organizations. But eventually I ran across Kuhio, and he just said, let's work together, let's get some solutions happening. So why are data-driven solutions important? They're important because they let us identify bottlenecks. They let us solve these problems faster, and they let us do it more efficiently with less wasted money and resources. So CNHA was already embracing the data before I joined the team. Shortly after the fire, they opened the Kako'o Maui Resource Center. In that center, they've helped over 2,700 impacted individuals, which represents over 848 families. I made a little typo here, but that's about 1/4, about 25% of all impacted families on Maui. Based on the data out of that program, they created the Host Housing Support Program. in which 253 hosts who are housing displaced families are getting financial support for that. That's supporting about 7% of our impacted families. That's a large percentage. So let's look at some of the data coming out of the Kāko'o Center. First, out of all those people filtering through, we're seeing that about 2/3 of those people were previously renters in Lahaina. This is a really important piece of information because renters and homeowners are going to have a different set of needs that we need to reach as we rebuild. It also tells us that as we rebuild, we need to make sure that we rebuild a lot of long-term rental options for these folks. One of the unique challenges faced by renters is that most of them don't have rental insurance. This is in contrast to homeowners, most of whom are getting financial support from their homeowner insurance plans. But this just shows us, one of the unique ways in which we have to support some of our displaced families. We also see that over half of the people who've come to the Kāko'o Center have lost their jobs. 58% of the families have experienced job loss. This dovetails nicely with the trades program where we just saw that great graduation ceremony and many other efforts to employ these people. But from my lens, focusing on housing, it also shows one of the challenges we face. Most long-term housing options require applications where you have to show proof of employment and income. This is an obstacle for many of these people who are impacted by the fires. And here's maybe the most important piece of information that came out of the Kāko'o Center. We have a lot of people in these hotels on the west side, but there's quite a few people who are scattered throughout the rest of the island. The people in the hotels have access to Red Cross staff just by walking down to the lobby, but these families scattered around the island, for them, the Kāko'o Center has become kind of a hub for where they can come to get help and support. And seeing that the majority, not the majority, but the largest category of people coming to the center were people that were being housed by family and friends, CNHA and Kuhio decided to launch the Host Housing Support Program. So the Host Housing Support Program offers financial assistance to those hosts that open up their homes in the wake of the fire to house their family and their friends. We can see the most common words that people are mentioning in their applications for the Host Housing Program. They're applying for money so they can pay for utilities, food, electric, water, rent, mortgage. You can see that the Host Housing Support Program is really helping with the basic necessities and allowing these families to continue hosting our displaced population. Of the families that are either in the process of applying to or already approved for the program, 96% of them were able to stay on Maui. This is great news. We should keep every family who wants to stay on Maui, we should be able to find them housing on the island. We've had a small number of families hosting on the Big Island and on Oahu, and I think there's a lot more opportunity there to host our displaced residents who are fine going to those other places. Data also helps us find the gaps. If we look at the ethnicities of the families that are being supported by the Host Housing Program, we see that Filipinos, Hawaiians, Caucasians, and Japanese are well represented. But we also need to look at who's not represented. The lens I bring to this problem is informed by my wife, who is the executive director of Roots Reborn, which is an immigrant aid organization that sprung up in the wake of the fires. From her, I know that Latinos and Hispanics make up at least 11% of the population in Lahaina, and that number is almost certainly higher because of undocumented immigrants. We don't have any Latinos or Hispanics represented being supported by the Host Housing Program. This is not a criticism of the program, but it just shows the value of looking at the data to see who's falling through the gaps. What do we need to do to reach the people who really need help? And here's a graph showing how long our hosts have actually been housing these families. The fires began on August 8th, and we can see the vast majority of our hosts took people in within the first week after the fires. We see some peaks of new hosts joining at the 1 month and the 2 month marks, and those happen to also correspond with when hotel contracts came up and people were being shuffled through hotels and they needed other options. We have more hotel contracts expiring at the beginning of December and at the beginning of February. So it's a good thing that we have this Host Housing Support Program to hopefully provide some sort of backstop to families that are impacted by that. This brings me to the main thing that everyone's talking about. Housing is the bottleneck. Let's look at the data and see how we can find our way out of this housing problem. We have over 2,700 families still in hotels. We have 229 families who are in Airbnbs supported by state vouchers. We have 253 ohana with host families, and we have an uncounted number more in other short-term housing. That's over 3,500 displaced families that we need to find long-term housing stability for. On Maui, there's only one answer. Our long-term rental supply is tapped out. The only way we're gonna house people is with short-term rentals and second homes. Maui has over 12,000 short-term rentals and over 12,000 second homes. And in fact, many of these are in West Maui, where our families want to be. We need to be using this housing to house them. We only need to convert about 15% of these units to long-term housing. It would be great to get help from regulation, from our county council and from our mayor to incentivize these owners to do it, and even to put an outright ban on some of these short-term rentals. But even in the absence of that, I think 15% is a doable number. I want to believe that there's 15% of these owners who are mostly on the mainland who have big enough hearts that they'd be willing to come to the table and help us. The number one obstacle we're going to run into is that short-term rentals are very expensive. I got a hold of a bunch of Airbnb data and analyzed it for Airbnb rentals in West Maui and South Maui. If you look at that red line, that shows the results of my analysis. Basically, I estimate that if we need to pay the short-term rental owners the same amount they're making from tourists, and then factor in the property tax savings they would get from converting into a long-term rental, which pays lower taxes, we would still need to be paying these owners about $3,700 a month for a one-bedroom, $5,300 a month for a two-bedroom, and $6,900 a month for a three-bedroom. That's really expensive. From my housing data that I collected at MauiHollyMatch.org, I know what our families say they can pay. Our families can only pay less than half that amount. So they're not going to be able to stay in these places unless we come in with real financial assistance to get them into these units. It's also important to note that the big FEMA program to house these people, FEMA Direct Lease, they're still not paying enough to convert these short-term rentals. And that's really why we still have 2,700 families still in hotels. FEMA has their process for increasing this multiplier and paying more money to get these people into housing, but frankly, it's happening too slow. The other piece of data that came out of this Airbnb analysis was that actually many of our units are managed by just a handful of local property managers. This is actually really good news, because if we're going to start tackling this problem, we don't need to immediately start reaching out to thousands of owners who are mostly on the continent. We can focus on just a handful of local property managers and get access to thousands of units. So this all leads us to how we can start solving our housing problem right now. The first thing we have to do is sign up our short-term rental owners and get those property managers on board. Property managers first, but we're eventually going to have to go straight to the owners. Almost all of these owners are on the continent, and we need to have a huge unified messaging campaign. This is where people like our governor and our mayor and our traditional media and social media need to step in and get the word out. Most of these people aren't connected to our communities here. Many of them don't even realize we still have thousands of families in hotels. So we need to be talking about this as loudly and as frequently as we can so that they hear the message. That rent gap between what people can afford to pay and what we need to pay in order to get people into these short-term rentals is huge. FEMA's coming through, and they're going to supply some amount of that money. That's not going to help everybody, and it's still not enough. So we need private philanthropic dollars to step in right now and fund the remainder of that rent gap so we can get people out of hotels right now. And then finally, if we have the units and we have the funding, we need families to be pre-approved. We can't have a lengthy application process. We can't have a lease and then say, oh, your rent money is going to come in 3 months after these people are approved. We need to be able to have them pre-approved so they can move in right away. And that's it. That's my take on how we get out of this housing crisis led by data. Thank you.
Maui High School Saber.